Act 5 is the final act of Pygmalion. The setting returns to Mrs. Higgins' drawing room, a place that symbolizes wisdom, balance, and emotional understanding. Unlike Higgins' house, which is associated with scientific experiments and intellectual pride, Mrs. Higgins' home provides a calm and civilized atmosphere where conflicts can finally be confronted and resolved. The act begins with an important development. Eliza has disappeared. After leaving Higgins' house at the end of Act 4, she cannot be found. For the first time, Higgins and Pickering become genuinely worried. They panic and begin searching for her. They even contact the police in an attempt to locate her. This reaction is significant because it reveals something that Higgins has never openly admitted. Until now, he treated Eliza as an experiment and took her presence for granted. Her absence forces him to realize how important she has become in his life. Although he still struggles to express emotions properly, the audience can see that Eliza means far more to him than he previously acknowledged. Soon, Mrs. Higgins strongly criticizes both Higgins and Pickering. She scolds them for their careless behavior and for failing to think about Eliza's future. Throughout the play, Mrs. Higgins has repeatedly warned them about the consequences of their actions. Now her warnings have proven correct. She reminds them that Eliza is not a scientific project, not a doll, and not an object created for amusement. She is a human being with feelings, hopes, fears, and rights. This is one of the central messages of the play. Human beings cannot be treated as experiments without considering the emotional consequences. Mrs. Higgins therefore acts as the moral voice of the drama. She represents compassion, common sense, and emotional intelligence. The act then introduces one of the most humorous developments in the play, the return of Alfred Doolittle. When Doolittle first appeared, he was a poor dustman who proudly described himself as one of the undeserving poor. Now he returns completely transformed. He is richly dressed, fashionable, and looks almost like a bridegroom preparing for a wedding. The audience immediately notices the dramatic change in his appearance. The reason for this transformation is deeply ironic. A wealthy man has left Doolittle a yearly pension after receiving a recommendation from Higgins. As a result, Doolittle suddenly becomes financially secure and enters the respectable middle class. Ordinarily, such a change would be viewed as a blessing. However, Shaw turns the situation into a brilliant comedy. Instead of celebrating his good fortune, Doolittle complains bitterly about it. According to him, wealth has ruined his freedom. When he was poor, he could live as he pleased without worrying about social expectations. Now that he is respectable, society expects him to behave responsibly. He must follow rules, maintain appearances, and meet moral standards. Doolittle feels trapped by what he calls middle-class morality. He dislikes the responsibilities that come with wealth. He misses the freedom of his earlier life. This creates one of the greatest ironies in the play. Most people dream of becoming rich. Doolittle dreams of escaping respectability. Through this comic situation, Shaw satirizes conventional ideas about success and social advancement. He suggests that every social class has its own limitations and pressures. Wealth does not automatically bring happiness, just as poverty does not automatically destroy it. Therefore, the opening section of Act 5 serves several important purposes. It shows Higgins finally recognizing Eliza's importance, allows Mrs. Higgins to emphasize the human consequences of the experiment, and uses Doolittle's transformation to continue Shaw's criticism of social values and middle-class morality. The act prepares the audience for the final confrontation between Eliza and Higgins, where questions of identity, independence, and human dignity will finally come to the forefront. This slide brings together several important ideas that help us understand the deeper meaning of Pygmalion. Here, Shaw contrasts different characters and uses them to communicate his social and moral message. Let us begin with Alfred Doolittle and the concept of the undeserving poor. Earlier in the play, Doolittle proudly described himself as a member of the undeserving poor. At that time, he was free, irresponsible, and carefree. He had very little money, but he also had very few obligations. He did not worry about social respectability, public opinion, or middle-class expectations. He lived according to his own rules. Now, however, everything has changed. Because he has unexpectedly become wealthy, society expects him to behave differently. People now expect him to be respectable, responsible, and morally upright. He finds himself forced into social obligations, including marriage and greater responsibility. Ironically, the wealth that most people would celebrate becomes a burden for Doolittle. Instead of feeling liberated, he feels trapped. This is one of Shaw's finest examples of satire. Through Doolittle, Shaw humorously criticizes middle-class morality and questions the assumption that wealth automatically leads to happiness. For examination purposes, remember that Doolittle serves as Shaw's instrument for attacking conventional ideas about respectability and social success. Now let us move to Eliza's return. When Eliza reappears, she is very different from the emotional and angry young woman we saw in Act 4. She appears calm, confident, and completely self-controlled. This change is extremely significant. Earlier, her transformation was mainly external. She learned pronunciation, manners, and fashionable behavior. Now her transformation has become internal. She possesses self-respect, confidence, and emotional maturity. She no longer depends on Higgins for approval. She has discovered her own identity. This is the true completion of her journey. The most important moment on this slide occurs when Eliza thanks Pickering. She makes one of the most famous statements in the entire play. The difference between a lady and a flower girl is not how she behaves, but how she's treated. This quotation is central to Shaw's philosophy. Eliza explains that Pickering always treated her with courtesy and respect. From the very beginning, he addressed her politely and behaved as though she already deserved dignity. Because he treated her like a lady, she gradually began to think and act like one. This idea is revolutionary. Shaw suggests that identity is not created only by language, clothing, or education. Identity is also shaped by how society treats an individual. Respect creates confidence. Kindness encourages growth. Human dignity allows people to discover their potential. This statement is often considered the central message of Pygmalion. The slide also presents a comparison between Pickering and Higgins. This comparison helps us understand why Eliza values Pickering so highly. Pickering is respectful. Higgins is rude. Pickering is encouraging. Higgins is arrogant. Pickering is humane and compassionate. Higgins is often insensitive to other people's feelings. Both men participated in Eliza's education. However, Eliza makes it clear that Pickering contributed something far more important than speech lessons. He gave her respect, and according to Shaw, respect is more powerful than education alone. This comparison also highlights one of the play's central lessons. Knowledge and intelligence are valuable, but they must be accompanied by humanity and kindness. A person may be brilliant like Higgins, but without empathy, that brilliance remains incomplete. Therefore, this slide marks a crucial stage in the conclusion of Pygmalion. Doolittle's transformation satirizes social respectability, Eliza's return demonstrates her inner growth, and her famous tribute to Pickering reveals Shaw's deepest belief: people become their best selves when they are treated with dignity, respect, and humanity. This section brings us to the final confrontation between Higgins and Eliza and helps us understand why the ending of Pygmalion is so unusual and important. Let us begin with Higgins' reaction to Eliza's criticism. When Eliza accuses Higgins of treating her badly, Higgins defends himself. He argues that he treats everyone in the same manner. According to him, he is rude not only to Eliza but also to Pickering, Mrs. Pierce, and other people around him. In Higgins' mind, this proves that he is fair and unbiased. However, this response reveals a major weakness in his character. He still fails to understand the emotional impact of his behavior. He judges actions by intention rather than effect. Because he does not intend to hurt people, he believes he has done nothing wrong. But Shaw shows that good intentions alone are not enough. The way we treat others affects their feelings, confidence, and sense of self-worth. This is something Higgins struggles to understand throughout the play. Next, we learn about Eliza's future plans. Unlike the frightened girl of Act 1, Eliza now thinks independently about her future. Several possibilities are suggested. She may marry Freddie Ainsford Hill. She may teach phonetics and use the skills she has learned. She may even work with Nepomuk, the phonetics expert who admired her linguistic abilities. The important point is not which option she chooses. The important point is that she now has choices. At the beginning of the play, poverty limited her opportunities. Now she possesses education, confidence, and self-respect. She is capable of shaping her own future. This shows her complete development into an independent individual. The next stage is Higgins' outrage. When Eliza refuses to remain under his influence, Higgins becomes angry. He jokes about threatening her and tries to reassert his authority. His reaction reveals something deeper. For much of the play, Higgins has enjoyed controlling the experiment. He has been the teacher, and Eliza has been the student. Now those roles are changing. Eliza is no longer dependent on him. She thinks for herself and challenges him openly. Higgins finds it difficult to accept this loss of control. Yet, beneath his frustration, an important realization begins to emerge. For the first time, Higgins truly sees Eliza as an equal. Earlier, he viewed her as a flower girl, a pupil, or an experiment. Now he recognizes her strength and independence. This leads to one of the most important moments in the play. He describes Eliza as a tower of strength. This phrase is highly significant. It shows that Higgins finally admires Eliza not because she speaks correctly, but because she possesses courage, confidence, and character. In a sense, Eliza has succeeded beyond Higgins' original expectations. He taught her language, but she developed something much greater, personal strength. Finally, we come to the open ending of the play. Unlike many traditional dramas, Pygmalion does not provide a clear romantic conclusion. Shaw deliberately refuses to tell the audience exactly what happens next. Several possibilities remain open. Eliza may marry Freddie. She may return to Higgins as a friend and equal. She may choose a completely independent life. Shaw leaves the future unresolved. This decision was intentional. He disliked sentimental endings in which the hero and heroine automatically marry. Such endings, in his opinion, ignored real social and psychological complexities. Instead, Shaw creates an ending that encourages the audience to think. The focus is not on romance. The focus is on independence, identity, and personal growth. The true victory of the play is not whether Eliza marries someone. The true victory is that she has become capable of making her own decisions. Therefore, the ending of Pygmalion reflects Shaw's modern outlook. Higgins finally recognizes Eliza's strength, Eliza gains control over her future, and the open ending emphasizes freedom and self-determination rather than conventional romance. Through this conclusion, Shaw challenges traditional dramatic expectations and celebrates the growth of an independent human personality. This slide presents some of the most important critical interpretations of Pygmalion. Rather than focusing on events, it examines the deeper meanings behind the ending and the central ideas Shaw wants the audience to remember. Let us begin with the first point, the unconventional ending. One of the most remarkable features of Pygmalion is that Shaw refuses to provide a traditional happy ending. Most 19th-century plays would end with a marriage between the hero and heroine. Audiences expected romance to solve all conflicts. Shaw deliberately rejects this convention. Instead of telling us exactly what happens to Eliza, he leaves the ending open. There is no clear resolution. The audience must decide how Eliza's story continues. Will she marry Freddie? Will she remain connected to Higgins? Will she choose complete independence? Shaw never gives a definite answer. For competitive examinations, remember that this anti-romantic conclusion is one of the most important features of modern drama. It reflects Shaw's belief that real life is more complicated than fairy tales. The second major issue is the question, is Eliza really better off after the transformation? This is one of the central questions of the entire play. On one hand, Eliza has gained many advantages. She has received education. She speaks refined English. She possesses confidence and self-respect. She can now move freely within higher social circles. These achievements seem to suggest success. However, Shaw also shows the negative side of transformation. Eliza experiences social displacement. She no longer belongs comfortably to her old world. At the same time, she is not completely accepted by the new world. She also faces uncertainty about her future and economic security. Therefore, Shaw does not present social mobility as entirely positive or entirely negative. Instead, he shows both its gains and its losses. The next section compares Doolittle and Eliza as parallel characters. This comparison is extremely important. Both characters experience social transformation, but they react in opposite ways. Eliza wants to rise in social class. She actively seeks education, refinement, and improvement. She is ambitious and determined. Doolittle, however, dislikes his rise in social class. He rejects respectability and prefers the freedom of his earlier life. While Eliza seeks refinement, Doolittle resists it. While Eliza is ambitious, Doolittle remains carefree. This contrast helps Shaw explore the complexities of social mobility. The comparison demonstrates that moving from one social class to another always involves both benefits and sacrifices. Some opportunities are gained, while certain freedoms may be lost. Finally, we come to one of the most important ideas in the entire play: language and identity. Throughout Pygmalion, Shaw repeatedly shows the power of language. Speech changes how society perceives an individual. Because Eliza learns refined pronunciation, people begin treating her differently. Language affects social status. It influences self-perception. It creates new opportunities. However, Shaw also shows that language alone is not enough. True identity includes character, dignity, emotions, and self-respect. At the beginning of the play, Eliza's Cockney accent limits her opportunities. By the end, her improved speech opens doors that were previously closed. Yet her greatest achievement is not linguistic. It is personal. She learns to value herself and demand respect from others. Therefore, the final message of Pygmalion is much broader than a lesson about pronunciation. Shaw argues that society often judges people unfairly based on accent, appearance, and class. At the same time, he demonstrates that education and respectful treatment can transform lives. The open ending, Eliza's uncertain future, Doolittle's ironic rise to respectability, and the power of language all combine to create a modern drama that questions social prejudice and celebrates human dignity. This is why Pygmalion remains one of the most influential and thought-provoking plays in English literature. This slide helps us understand the deeper meaning of the ending of Pygmalion. Shaw wants the audience to look beyond speech lessons and social success and focus on the real transformation that has taken place within Eliza. Let us begin with the idea of true transformation. At the beginning of the play, Higgins believes transformation is mainly a matter of language, pronunciation, clothing, and manners. According to his theory, if a flower girl learns to speak like a duchess, she can become one socially. By the end of the play, Shaw shows that this view is incomplete. Real transformation is not simply about external changes. It is not just about beautiful clothes. It is not just about a refined accent. It is not just about learning upper-class manners. The most important changes happen inside a person. Eliza develops confidence. She gains dignity. She acquires self-respect. She learns to value herself and demand respect from others. This inner growth is far more important than any change in pronunciation. In fact, the greatest success of the experiment is not that Eliza sounds like a lady. It is that she becomes a strong and independent individual. The next important idea is the feminist dimension of the play. Many critics consider Pygmalion an early feminist drama because of Eliza's journey. At the beginning, she is economically vulnerable and dependent upon others. As the story progresses, she becomes increasingly self-reliant. By Act 5, she refuses to be dominated by Higgins. She refuses to become anyone's possession. She insists on making her own decisions. She chooses her own future rather than allowing others to choose it for her. This is a remarkable achievement for a woman in the social context of the early 20th century. Eliza emerges as a modern independent woman who values freedom, dignity, and equality. Her victory is not over society alone. It is also over fear, dependence, and insecurity. The slide also highlights Higgins' limitation. Higgins is undoubtedly brilliant. He understands language better than almost anyone else. He can identify social backgrounds through accents. He can teach speech with extraordinary success. However, his brilliance has limits. He understands language, but he does not fully understand emotions. He understands phonetics, but he struggles with relationships. He understands sounds, but not always feelings. Throughout the play, he repeatedly fails to recognize the emotional consequences of his actions. This is why he experiences difficulty understanding Eliza's anger and pain. Shaw suggests that intellectual ability alone is not enough. True wisdom requires emotional sensitivity and human understanding. Now let us review the major themes of Act 5. One important theme is independence. Eliza gains the freedom to make her own choices. Another major theme is identity. She finally discovers who she is beyond social labels. The theme of class mobility continues because both Eliza and Doolittle experience movement between social classes. The act also emphasizes respect and dignity. Eliza's greatest demand is not wealth or status but recognition of her humanity. The theme of transformation reaches its conclusion as her internal growth becomes complete. Feminism remains central because Eliza rejects domination and claims control over her future. The act also contains social satire, especially through Doolittle's complaints about becoming respectable. Finally, Shaw explores freedom versus responsibility. Doolittle gains wealth but loses freedom, while Eliza gains independence but must accept responsibility for her future. The symbols on this slide further reinforce these ideas. Doolittle's wealth symbolizes the burden of middle-class morality and social expectations. Instead of bringing happiness, it creates new responsibilities and restrictions. Mrs. Higgins' house symbolizes wisdom, balance, and emotional intelligence. Throughout the play, it serves as a place where practical judgment and human understanding prevail. Eliza's calmness symbolizes her inner transformation. Unlike the emotional and uncertain girl of earlier acts, she now possesses confidence and self-control. Finally, the open ending symbolizes freedom of choice and uncertainty. Shaw refuses to dictate Eliza's future because he wants the audience to focus on her independence rather than on a conventional romantic conclusion. Therefore, Act 5 completes Eliza's journey from poverty to self-respect, from dependence to independence, and from uncertainty to confidence. The play ends not with a fairy tale romance but with a celebration of personal growth, human dignity, and the freedom to shape one's own destiny. Now let us quickly revise the most important events of Act 5, which are highly useful for examinations and last-minute revision. The act begins with Higgins and Pickering searching for Eliza after she leaves Higgins' house. Her disappearance makes them realize how important she has become in their lives. Mrs. Higgins strongly criticizes both men for the careless treatment of Eliza. She reminds them that Eliza is a human being with feelings and a future, not merely an experiment. Alfred Doolittle returns as a wealthy man. Ironically, instead of enjoying his new status, he complains about the responsibilities and social expectations that come with respectability. Through him, Shaw satirizes middle-class morality. Eliza then returns, but she is no longer the frightened flower girl of the earlier acts. She appears calm, confident, and independent, showing that her transformation is now complete on an emotional and psychological level. One of the most important moments occurs when Eliza thanks Colonel Pickering. She explains that his respectful treatment helped her become a lady more than speech lessons ever could. During the final confrontation, Higgins gradually recognizes Eliza's strength, confidence, and independence. For the first time, he sees her as an equal rather than merely a student or experiment. Finally, the play ends with an unresolved conclusion. Shaw deliberately leaves Eliza's future uncertain. She may marry Freddie, remain connected to Higgins, or choose a completely independent life. This open ending reflects Shaw's rejection of traditional romantic endings and emphasizes freedom of choice. To summarize Act 5 in one sentence, Eliza achieves true independence, Higgins learns to respect her strength, and Shaw leaves the future open to emphasize personal freedom rather than romantic convention.